You are listening to the Strange Oddities Podcast on the KGRA Radio Network. Please visit their website, kgraradio.com. You are listening to the Strange Oddities Podcast, which rebroadcast on the KGRA Radio at 2 a.m. Eastern Time, 11 p.m. Pacific Time.
And please welcome your host of Strange Oddities Podcast, Matthew J. Haas.
All right, everybody. Welcome, listeners and viewers of the Strange Oddities Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew J. Haas. Welcome to the show. Every week, you never know who's going to show up on the Strange Oddities Podcast. Before I welcome this amazing guest we have tonight, as always, guys, I can't hear the show live as I'm running the show. Otherwise, you'd have really terrible audio. So please let us know how the show is going. If there's any issues, let us know. Give me a private chat. Guys, subscribe to the show if you haven't already on YouTube. We also have a Facebook page. We simulcast on not only Facebook, but YouTube. We have a website, strangeodditiespodcast.wordpress.com. All right, if you want to be a guest on the show, strangeodditiespodcast@gmail.com. And guys, upcoming guests, all the information that you need to know about Strange Oddities Podcast, become a follower on our Facebook page. That's where you're going to get all that great info. And without further delay, I'd like to get this nice, amazing gentleman on tonight. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Going to bring this gentleman on. Guys, I am privileged to welcome Mr. Loyd Auerbach. He's a widely recognized parapsychologist in the paranormal field. He works with the Rhine Research Center. He's also an associate of the Parapsychology Association. He's like all over the world as far as a country doing, a lot of things in the paranormal. He's in California, so we're on West Coast time over there. Mr. Loyd Auerbach, welcome to the Strange Oddities Podcast. I really appreciate you doing the podcast tonight.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah. So we have so much to talk about. You have a new book that's out. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's my first foray into fiction, published fiction anyway. I've done not 10 other books that I've either co-written or written myself. And this one is co-written by a couple of former screenwriters who we collaborated on a script years ago, and it never went anywhere. So it's now a novel.
Yeah. And you got an awesome review by one of the co-writers of Tom Clancy, I believe, gave you a nice review on your new book, which is great. He's a great writer. So to get a nice review from a co-writer of his is like phenomenal.
Thanks.
So.
Yeah, I think people really like it. It is a paranormal mystery, so it's first in a series actually.
Yeah.
And mystery with a lot of psychic stuff in it, and I did try to make it closer to reality as possible.
Nice. I just want to show our fans of Mr. Loyd Auerbach. I have my own copy. I told Loyd, I said, I can't wait to read it. So I wish I had a signed copy, but maybe one day I'll.
Well, we can send you. We're having book plates made. We're all going to sign the book plates.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. So you've been in the field a little while. You're from White Plains, so we're fellow New Yorkers, which is great. It's nice pace for me to have a fellow New Yorker like yourself on the show. But you're in California right now. You work with the Rhine Research. You're doing a lot of classes, online classes. That you've been public speaking for a long time. How did you get started in the field? Tell a little bit about yourself to our listeners.
Sure. I I've been interested since I was a little kid in psychic experiences and ghosts and ESP, all that stuff. Partly because of television shows. My dad worked for NBC. I had a TV show in my room when I was 2, so I am the product of television in many respects, both what it was broadcast, but also behind the scenes. I spent a lot of time growing up at 30 Rock in New York City.
Nice.
So I know both sides of television. And it was really as a little science geek who was interested in comic books and science fiction and mythology, when I found parapsychology, which actually was because of the TV show Dark Shadows, I found the books by J.B. Rhine and others in the field at that time in the library. I really felt that this is where I needed to be. This was an important question. Who are we as humans, and what else can we do? So it just took me through my high school years in Elmsford, New York, where we had a parapsychology club when I was in high school. I got started, and I was fortunate timing-wise to be able to go into a graduate parapsychology program at that time, and got my master's in the field.
Nice.
And so I kind of count the beginnings of actually being in the field from the start of my graduate studies in 1979. But I've been in and around other parapsychologists. I got to meet a lot of people in high school, that kind of thing, for a long time before that.
Right. Yeah, it's a shit. You weren't able to meet J.B. Ryan. He passed probably before that time.
No, but I know Sally Feather, Sally
Right.
Ryan Feather very well. And
Yeah.
Actually, it was a letter from J.B. Ryan that helped convince the principal of the school to allow us to start a parapsychology program.
Nice. Yeah, J.B. Ryan is kind of like the godfather of parapsychology, so to speak, in our country.
The father of modern parapsychology research. Yes.
Yes, that was the nickname I was going to go with. Yes.
Yeah.
So, what a privilege to kind of like be under their tutelage, so to speak, and go in their footsteps. What kind of work have you been doing with them?
Well, with the Rhine, actually, we just had a board. I think the board meeting maybe still going on. I had to duck out early because of
and I'm very fortunate to have you on the show, even while that's going on.
Board meeting, podcast. It's a toss up.
Right.
So the Rhine Center, which is the nation's oldest, longest running laboratory, of course, although there's not much research going on right now because of COVID, but that was originally the Duke University Parapsychology Lab. And when Rhine retired from Duke in 1965, he started a foundation, a nonprofit foundation, and an institute, which eventually became the Rhine Research Center after he passed. But it had been active. It's been active since around the very early 1930s.
Right.
And so my work, I'm mainly, I've been on the board of directors for a number of years. So that's a kind of advisory guidance role for the organization, along with other board members. And then I've been teaching for the education arm. We have an education center, Rhine Education Center, which has been doing online courses for, I think, since 2013 or 14. So I've been teaching since 2014.
Cool.
Yeah, and these are all online classes. We actually offer certificates, so people can actually take them for fun, or they can take them for a grade towards a certificate. There's a number of other interactions we have. The Rhine has a lot of online events. In fact, ever since COVID hit, we've moved everything online, and there's a lot of action there.
Right. Is Sally still around, or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, she is. She's not as active with the board anymore,
right.
But she's still around, and we get her for different things.
Yeah.
Just the courses that we're putting in, we're bouncing off everybody else. Paul Smith, who is one of the folks from the Stargate program, he was one of the folks who teaches for us.
Right.
Just taught a remote viewing course. I'm teaching a psychic dreaming course, an introduction to parapsychology class. I'm teaching a parapsychology and anthropology class right now. John Kruth, the executive director, teaches research classes. And then we'll be doing the field investigation class again, and others starting in late January.
Nice. That's awesome. What can, I guess, like, your students kind of expect? Like, I don't want to spoil it for them, but as far as, the classes that you give at Rhine or the online classes, what's kind of entailed with the classes?
Well, I mean, they're set up like a lot of online classes. We actually do live lectures, and
okay.
Then they're recorded because we have students from all over the world sometimes who clearly can't attend live.
Right.
So they're recorded, and then there's interactive forums for the students. We do have a lot of recommended reading and also some reading within the course room. and I interact with the students in a lot of different ways, as do the other instructors. We sometimes run experiments for them to try. So it's a kind of a typical online class, but because we're not a university and we don't have the stringent accreditation requirements, we can be a little bit more lax. So my students have to get used to things like, yeah, if you're a couple weeks late, it's okay. You know, things like that.
Yeah.
They're sometimes surprised by that, but we're not held to that kind of academic rigor. Although I cover the academic work in parapsychology.
Right. Do you obviously you kind of find maybe like because of the whole COVID situation, do you enjoy teaching more in person? Like, do you find like the challenges like doing interactive more challenging or?
I mean, honestly, I have always enjoyed teaching in person or lecturing in person. Right. I'm also a psychic entertainer, mentalist, and so really I'm not even doing that via Zoom, although some of my buddies are.
Right.
So the audience, having an audience either for speaking, it's a lot more, even just simply seeing people's faces and react, because we don't really do that during the lectures because of bandwidth and everything else. So
right. What are some of the methods that are you guys using at Ryan these days as far as psychic phenomena and PSI and all that good?
Well, the main research that was going on, we do have a bioenergy lab.
Okay.
John Kruth, the executive director, is the research director also. And he's been doing studies in looking at whether or not people who claim to produce energy effects, such as healers and martial artists and other folks, if they are actually giving off some extraordinary level of biophotons. I mean, the human brain gives off particles of light, not at a big rate, something like 4 to 5 per second. And these are so small that you need a completely dark room and what's called a photomultiplier tube and other devices to even detect any photons. And he's worked with a couple of healers who have done phenomenal amounts of increase this is all non-visible, by the way. So these are ultraviolet photons. And even at the level that one of them did, over 500,000 biophotons per second, he could not have seen, the person in the room, who's the only person in the room, could not have seen any light per se. So, but the photomultiplier tube can detect that sort of thing. And when you have a situation where a martial artist or a healer is asked to induce their energy state to start putting that energy out, and you have these huge spikes that are happening, it starts making you wonder about the history that we have about healers, especially, who are portrayed in old artwork as having halos around them and glows around them and similar energy fields around them. I mean, so clearly science is detecting something. So this would be a form of psychokinesis, of mind over matter, essentially.
Right. And you do have a book about mind over matter, if I'm not mistaken.
I do.
Yeah,
that is correct. The reprint came out a number of years ago, but the reprint came out in 2017. Right. And one of the things in that book that I'm most happy about, it's one of my favorite books that I've written, is that I got to incorporate some work, just some conversations that I had with athletes. My dad was a producer for NBC Sports. So I had a lot of chats with athletes and coaches over the years about extraordinary human performance and things. But I also incorporated quite a bit from somebody who became a mentor to me in the 1990s. I got to meet a guy by the name of Martin Caden in early 1992. And Caden wrote the book Cyborg, which became the $6 Million Man. He actually helped create the Bionic Woman TV show. He was incredibly prolific. He wrote over 200 books, novels, science fiction novels. He wrote thrillers. He wrote aviation stuff. He was an aviation expert. He was a consultant to NASA. He was around NASA for years, for decades, actually, since the very beginning. He actually knew the early guys. He knew all the astronauts. He knew Wernher von Braun. He knew all these people.
Wow.
And Marty was capable of doing mind over matter. He's capable of doing PK. So I did a lot of studies with him before he passed away of cancer in the late 90s. And we put his method of how you do PK in the book. And so I have done workshops teaching people how to do that. Not everybody can, but most people can.
Yeah. That's like the whole bending spoon kind of thing. Like if you
that wasn't that wasn't what he did.
Right.
but we have in and around our field because there's a good psychology behind mind over matter.
Right.
We have been doing spoon bending parties since an aerospace engineer named Jack Houck started in the late 70s. And when we, at our university, John F. Kennedy University, we did a whole bunch in the early 80s. And I've been doing them over the last few years.
Cool.
Again, nothing recent, but I did try a virtual spoon bending party recently. And I did have a couple people bending things, but it was a small group and there was not a lot of group energy. And there is a psychology here to do this.
Yeah. As long as you don't bend the laptop as you're interacting with them virtually. And
yeah. That we have to kind of set that intention up front. That's important.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I'm so into that stuff. Like how you guys, like the whole Rhine research thing, how they have stuff in laboratories and controlled environments. Because as paranormal investigators, it's hard for us to really get 100% controlled environments. So I kind of get jealous of laboratory people that get to have that in their own environment.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I have mainly been doing field research myself over the years, the last 40 years.
Right.
I don't do a lot of in-lab work, although I have consulted with some of my colleagues, especially about some of the laboratory controls against fraud.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, what we know is that ESP and psychokinesis, the research that's mainly done in the laboratory and has been done since Rhine's time, even before that, that gives us information that we can apply to the investigations and to assessing what's actually going on.
Right.
And one of the pieces that's missing from a lot of field investigators or ghost hunters and paranormal investigators is because of the TV shows, they don't see any relationship between what they're doing and what goes on in the lab. And there's a direct relationship to that.
Right.
Because what happens outside the lab helps us come up with questions and experiments inside the lab. And what happens inside the lab and the findings, what we learn about ESP and psychokinesis, helps us with the field investigations. And the reality is that if a ghost moves something, that's PK, that's mind over matter. And poltergeist phenomena is all mind over matter. And when somebody sees a ghost, there's a form of ESP happening. If you experience a residual haunting, you're experiencing ESP. So all of this stuff is interrelated. It's all part of the same thing. And to study just one, or try to study just one part of it, especially without knowing the history of how people have studied it before, means you're going to be fumbling around in the dark like a lot of ghost hunters do. We don't ever work in the dark, so that's not something we.
Right. I'm not a believer in working in the dark all the time. I get it. Like some of the equipment is designed, catch things in infrared.
Right.
That's one of the reasons. But I think if phenomena is going to happen, it's going to happen. Then you just got to be at the right place at the right time.
Well, that's it. I think right place at the right time. And so what you do is you try to figure out when the witnesses have experienced something. Right. Is there a pattern there? And it's rarely ever in the middle of the night. It's usually when the lights are on or during the daytime.
Yeah, no, you're right. Because most of the claims are during the day. It's when they work or how they live, and you're not there during those times. And I don't understand. Yeah, you get excited because you're going on a nighttime investigation. I guess that's the spooky effect of the investigation.
Yeah, it's a TV. It really is a television producer induced effect. That's what it is.
Yeah, lights out.
Yeah, when I started doing television around this subject. I started doing appearances on television in the early 80s. And when I did anything with a news crew or a TV crew in the field, they always want to go at night.
Right.
They always wanted to turn the lights down low or off. Of course, a couple of directors actually said, can we turn the lights off? At which point the camera guy would say, yeah, sure, if you want to show nothing on television.
Yeah, that would be pretty funny.
There was no night shot camera at that time, so
that's pretty funny. I have a good question in the chat group. We have a bunch of people in the chat going on. These are people who are listening from both Facebook and YouTube. I get the comments here in our feed. If you have access to it, I believe you have access.
I do. Yeah. I do.
There's one here from Ron Iacovetti. How possible is it that the PSI energy emitted for ESP or clairvoyance or healing is determined by the receptors or target for the energy?
So with ESP, we're not talking about necessarily emitting anything. ESP is receptive. We are perceiving. Our eyes are not emitting anything right now in order to see. We have light coming into the eye. So Extrasensory perception is perception. It's knowing, it's getting information. Clairvoyance is a form of ESP. Remote viewing is ESP. We're getting information. So there's not really any energy being emitted in that sense. With psychokinesis, then we're dealing with something different. With PK, we are dealing with something different in the sense that there may or may not be energy. There's a lot of different ways that we're looking at psychokinesis. We're still not quite sure what force is applied, how it works, because honestly, in some experiments, we have detected, at one moment, we're detecting electrostatic field. At another moment, we're detecting temperature changes. At another moment, it's almost like if there's 5 different ways for the mind to move this object, it will cycle through all 5 randomly.
Right.
So we don't really know that. But for example, with a ghost or with a haunting, a residual haunting, we are picking up information from a source. And we're still trying to figure out what that source is. And it's for residual hauntings, there's likely some form of electromagnetism and possibly the Earth's magnetic field, because we detect correlations in that way.
Right.
That's one reason why you're using magnetometers, EMF meters.
Right. And that's the whole reason why we do base readings, so that if you're going to use that theory, we want to apply those things to that.
Right.
Yep. So, I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of places that we go into and there's like high EMF everywhere. So it's kind of like throws that out the window.
Yeah. I know I've done so many investigations, and if we can't turn the power off in some instances, or if the building's under high tension power lines, you put the EMF meter away and you move on. I mean, the early investigators didn't have those, so not a big deal.
Right. So I always say it's really best to try to see if we can control the variables around the equipment that we're using and document what we're doing also, because if you get a collaboration with the different pieces of equipment, that's important. And I'm sure that's what you guys do in the laboratory, like as far as controlled variables and how you can apply those things to that.
Well, one thing that's important in the field and in the lab is if you're trying to measure things like the environment, we're trying to measure what's going on around the person.
Right.
You need the person to tell you that something is happening. So in an investigation, setting up the equipment doesn't do a lot of good unless you have a human being who has told you when things happen or what happens to them when things happen.
Right.
So you need to connect it to a human experience, and it's even better if you have somebody there.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we don't try to kick the witnesses out like some of the TV shows do, because they're already experiencing what we're investigating, and if they can be there and say, "Hey, I'm seeing that ghost again," and we're getting all these pieces of equipment measuring some really weird anomaly at the moment that they're experiencing something, that's really important. That's much more important than just the equipment going off.
Yeah, sure. So you can't necessarily just throw out anecdotes out the window either. Because
all right, so I know that there's this whole thing about anecdotal evidence, and it's no good. And the reality is, if you don't have anecdotal evidence, you don't have witness reports. If you don't have witness reports, what the hell are you investigating?
Right.
There's nothing to investigate.
Right. Exactly.
There are no ghosts. Because unless a human being sees a ghost, there's no ghost.
That's what I wanted to bring up. So, I think it's important to have eyewitnesses because it helps the investigation.
Yeah. And the other thing I should just mention, this is something we talk about with my students, is that using technology does not mean you're being scientific. It's how you use the data. That's what makes it scientific.
Right.
And in reality, we're a social science. Yes, these devices measure physical things, but what we're trying to get at is a human experience. Again, a person experienced a ghost. A person witnessed something happening. And so you've got to have that human element, which makes it a social science situation.
Right. What do you think of Michael Persinger's work with EMF and his background with all that?
So, that's a really important piece of work. Persinger first got involved with parapsychology because he was looking at how the Earth's magnetic field and shifts in the magnetic field of the Earth were causing changes in animal migrations, which still happens. Right. And he wanted to look at social science and see in psychology, for example, was there an impact of changing magnetic fields on behavior? Unfortunately, apparently, when he started looking into this in the late 70s, he did not find enough data in psychology experiments to indicate when exactly the experiment happened. And unless you know when, you could know where, but you couldn't know when. If you didn't know what day it happened and what time, you couldn't look up the past geomagnetic field in that area, except in parapsychology. We have meticulous records for that sort of thing because we're kind of paranoid of the skeptics coming after us. So that made us a better scientists in some respects.
Yeah.
So he found that there were actually correlations, connections between how the Earth's magnetic field shifted locally to that lab and the performance in the laboratory. And also for the Rhine Center, when people reported things, or the Society for Psychical Research, people reported occasionally when they had a psychic experience and where. And that data could also go, the anecdotal data could also go into that pile. Right. And then he started exploring, well, if the Earth's magnetic field has this effect on the brain or on us, can I artificially create something, a field change on a very local level, like right in the brain? And that's where his helmet came in.
Right, the God helmet. Yep.
The God helmet, yeah. And that's where his research came into, depending on how the field hit the brain, or just slices and dices. And these are not powerful fields. They're very low level fields, but they affect us.
Sure.
And they affect us in really interesting ways, and they can cause hallucinations. The difference between Persinger's work in the lab and where this might occur outside the lab is, if I am in a laboratory and have a hallucination, it's unlikely that hallucination is going to have any relation to the history of that laboratory, unless there was some real history there.
Right.
But if I have that same experience with the Earth's field in Gettysburg, I'm going to pick up stuff from the Civil War, because that's the information there.
Right.
So there's a relationship in what we're doing. It's one of the reasons why we started using EMF meters to begin with, was because of this work.
Sure. Yeah. And my other thing I wanted to bring up while we're into the whole EMF conversation was, what did you think of, I'm sure you are familiar with Dr. Barry Taff and the entity, and they tried to bring the haunting into their lab space, sort of.
They did not. They did not do that.
No.
They did not do that. That's in the movie. They did not do that.
Right.
No. Okay. So I know Barry very well. I also know Carrie Gaynor. I've known Carrie Gaynor actually since around the same time the movie came out, even before the movie came out. And they did not do that. When Frank DiFilippo wrote the novel based on their case, he novelized, he fictionalized a lot of stuff.
Right.
And then when the movie was made, they turned it towards a sexual direction, which was not as evident. It was more violent, more physical than sexual in the reality, in the real case. And apparently Thelma Moss or somebody suggested it'd be really cool if we could actually bring the ghosts into a laboratory controlled condition. And the screenwriter took that off. But, when I was watching that movie, I was thinking, because again, my dad was in sports, NBC Sports. I was thinking that there is no university on the planet Earth that would allow a parapsychology group to build a fake house inside a gymnasium with liquid helium to try to catch a ghost.
Wow.
Unless they had their own money of like millions and millions of dollars. That was actually more fantastic to me than the paranormal phenomena in the movie.
That's pretty funny. We have another question in the chat by Philip Wyatt. Are we trying to prove the survival of the human consciousness and personality after death, or are we just recording environmental changes when a seemingly paranormal occurrence happens, ? Unless we prove scientifically life after death exists, then we can't prove spirit ghosts exist.
Okay, so those are important questions.
Sure.
When you're using environmental equipment, you're trying to connect or support the human experience and figure out if there's any difference between apparition cases and hauntings and other things. The question of life after death is important. We call this survival of bodily death. And the idea is that human consciousness, our mind or spirit, whatever you want to call it, survives the death of the body. There's a very fundamental problem that we have in trying to prove this. First of all, there's no such thing as absolute proof in science. There's acceptance of evidence, but there's not proof. So we talk about that all the time in common usage, but that's not a scientific thing, because science changes all the time. But more importantly, if we're trying to say that something survives the death of the body, first we have to define what that something is. And if we say consciousness, that's great. let's look to science and see what science says about consciousness in the body. Science does not know what consciousness is. Science, there's a big, vast difference of opinion. There's a spectrum here going from the brain is, consciousness is just wetware in the brain. It's software in the brain. When the brain dies, that's it. You're just a meat robot. That's it. Not even any free will. You're just pre-programmed. To the other side, the other end, which says, no, the mind may not even be in the brain. It may be kind of out here. Consciousness may be out here and work through us. We're like a TV set getting a satellite or cable signal. Sure. So until mainstream science or any science can figure out what consciousness is, we can't prove that it survives after death. We do know that something that seems to be like consciousness, interactive consciousness, exists in these cases, but we can't absolutely say that's what's going on. In fact, many people within my field feel that it's all a form of ESP coupled with getting information and kind of unconscious story creation. Not even, it's coming from real information, but it's not a ghost. It's not conscious.
Right. I always like to tell people when I do public speaking and I get those type of questions all the time, I just tell everybody we can't scientifically prove things right now because, like you said, we don't know what consciousness is quite yet. So therefore, everything is just really a debate. It's a discussion. It's an idea. It's a theory. But we're moving forward because, I think we've come a long way with the research that we've gotten, back from the day from J.B. Rhine and Harry Price and, all these great investigators in the field, Dr. Barry Taff, they all laid the footwork for us. But what's your thoughts on the current status of the field? Do you think, we've gone really far? Are we at a stalemate? I think we've made a lot of progress.
Well, we've made some progress. Certainly, we've made progress with our methodologies, with our evidence. We have, I think, on many levels. I hear skeptics always saying, well, there's no evidence for any of this, or you can't repeat the experiments. And actually, that's not true. We have a lot of repeatable experiments. We have data that significantly supports that something's going on here in different types of experiments. It's just that they don't ever want to look at the evidence. So in science, you have building evidence. And even with the idea of survival of death, granted, you could look at the evidence from two different perspectives, but they are both psychic. They both support something about that.
Right.
And then we're more recently doing research, which has never been done before, with mediums who are subjecting themselves, allowing themselves to be put into brain scan situations.
Right.
And, I occasionally run into skeptics who say that mediums are all phonies. It's like, really? What about the mediums whose brains are differently active when they're talking to spirits than when they're having any other conversation whatsoever, or even making it up?
Right.
They're not faking it. They may be wrong. They may not be talking to a spirit, but they're not faking it. So we're using the tools of science, but where the field is right now, honestly, is in a lack of funding, at least in the United States.
Right.
We are in, because of the skeptics organizations having influence around the country since the mid-1970s in academia in the United States. It's a very hostile environment in academics, to the point where if someone in a university expresses interest in parapsychology personally, and not even professionally, but personally, if they do it to the wrong person at their university, they could have some serious problems. So it's, the very fact that people talk about this stuff being woo-woo or just woo, derogatory term, I want to say that's almost a hate crime at some point.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it.
Yeah.
It could be. My thing is, I think we should maybe spend more time in investing in academic type of things into the paranormal field, like science and quantum theory.
Yeah.
Physics, psychology. There's all kinds of
Well, I hate to say it, but there's two things. There's a lot of people in the UK and the United Kingdom that are doing work in parapsychology or related work. It's not as hostile an environment there. There's over 20 universities that have courses in parapsychology, or what they call anomalistic psychology.
Right.
And so there's that element, but there's the cultural element that we can't get past here in the States.
Yeah.
and part of it, unfortunately, is supported by pop culture that comes from television. Telling everybody that ghosts are evil and all this stuff is bad.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help at all. But when it comes right down, honestly, it comes right down to money. There's really no significant funding in this field. Right. And I've actually, there was a point where I had a conversation with, that time they were the Pac-10 coaches, because my dad was producing the tournament of Roses parade in the Rose Bowl, and he had a retreat.
Sure.
And we started talking about all of this stuff. And I said, so what would it take at your universities to get a parapsychology program? And it was actually a funny discussion, because they all agreed that if it was a significant amount of money, let's say $20 million, and at least half of that, if not 2/3, went to the athletic department, then they would fight tooth and nail to make sure there was a parapsychology department there as well.
Right.
Well, because that's where the money is at universities.
Right. How many universities are there currently in the country that offer parapsychology? I know there's Duke University. There's not many.
No, Duke does not.
They don't anymore?
No, they haven't for years.
Okay.
The only university that has, there are a few colleges that might actually have a single course, and there certainly are skeptics who teach a few courses here and there.
Right.
West Georgia College is pretty much the only university that has any undergraduate courses in parapsychology. That's one of my colleagues, Christine Simmons Moore, is the psychology chair there. There are no college, and there are no degrees in parapsychology in the United States at all.
Right.
We tried. I have one course I teach online for Atlantic University, which is an online school, mainly transpersonal psychology, started by Edgar Casey, actually, originally. And it's a fully accredited school, but we tried actually getting an academic parapsychology program, and the accrediting body basically turned us down to even look at our proposal.
Right. I always tell people that, unfortunately, because there's lack of that in universities, what you can do is go for a psychology degree,
Yes.
Get things that could help you along, like a career in photography or videography, or even go for a science degree, stuff like that.
Actually, a general science degree would be very helpful. A physics degree, if you look at the people in the Parapsychological Association, at least a third have a degree in psychology, certainly not in parapsychology. There are a number who have degrees in physics. We have biologists, we have neuroscientists, and we also have anthropologists. But there are a few universities that offer consciousness studies degrees and programs.
Nice.
So that is a really useful entry into this subject. And on top of it, we're really kind of aligning ourselves with the folks doing consciousness studies, because we are studying consciousness.
Right.
So that's a good, I think that's going to be a growth field to some extent. There is some funding in that area. University of Arizona has it. UC Santa Cruz has it. There's a couple of universities on the East Coast that do as well. Nice. So I think that that would be important.
Sure, definitely. Another question in the chat. Do you agree that scientism and the idea of promissory or materialism taints the big picture of what the data suggests, because it hinders the acceptance of the phenomenon?
Well, scientism, which was coined actually by someone near the field of parapsychology years ago, is the dogma of science and of mainstream science. And there's no question that scientism does hinder what we do, because people don't believe, they won't even look at the evidence typically if they're that dogmatic. When people call themselves skeptics, they're not really skeptics. They're usually debunkers or disbelievers. So they have faith that this doesn't exist, because they won't look at the evidence.
Right.
But so far as materialism goes, there are a number of people in parapsychology who are materialists, and they often come from physics, but some come from philosophy, and they look at the evidence as indicating that human beings who are alive can do all this, and that even the ghostly type stuff, which seems to many of us to indicate survival of death, is really a form of ESP, a unique form of ESP that makes us think that that's actually going on. You can still have really good evidence. You can really have really good information that the person did absolutely not know, but that's how they look at it. So it just really depends. But there are, of course, a lot of materialists who disdain psychology even, and just back away from anything that smacks of subjective experience whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. What's your thought on quantum theory and people that apply quantum theory in the paranormal?
So my colleague Ed May, who by the way is a materialist, but he was the former program director of the Stargate program from the government program from 85 to 95, and my co-author on our book ESP Wars, East and West, which is the story of that program and the Russian program. We actually,
Nice.
it's the only book that actually has contributions from the Russians telling us what really went on and what goes on actually. So Ed raised, we talked about this, and you can use it as a metaphor, but only as a metaphor, because the first problem is a physics problem, and that would be, how does information get from the macro size to the quantum size, transfer, and then come back from that little tiny subatomic size to hit our brains in a way that neuroscience would say quantum particles or quantum physics is affecting the brain. So first of all, it has to size up. And secondly, then somehow, which is a psychology problem, once it's in the brain, how do we come to conscious awareness of it? So there are significant issues there. However, you can say that, we are in physics looking at finding that particles that are entangled seem to have information transfer, instantaneous information transfer. But again, these are quantum particles, and we don't know if that will scale up necessarily to the real world. But we can use that as a metaphor, certainly.
Right. What about there's a connection with photons and quantum theory in the paranormal?
Well, I mean, photons are, at a level of size that is not quantum per se, but they're the size of electrons. They're that level of size pretty much. And you can detect things like that. Clearly, we can influence. There's the observer effect, which when you observe a quantum experiment, the observation actually seems to set the actual endpoint, what actually happened. There is talk of consciousness relating to or affecting the quantum world. But again, we're still not sure exactly how that would work. We do see in the biophoton research that John Kruth and others are doing that we can at least produce these things at that level of size from our brains by doing something. We have no clue, there's no way to know consciously how to do that from a physics perspective or a neuroscience or psychology perspective for that matter. But that's one of the things that we have to look at. When somebody moves an object or affects a computer, especially if they move an object in another room, how do you do that? I mean, think about what's the method? How do I screw up a computer if I have no idea how a computer works? So we would say that there's a component of ESP even in moving objects or affecting objects or healing for that matter.
So I hope everybody can tell that I did my homework tonight, having Mr. Loyd Auerbach on the show. I hope I've been having some good questions for him so far. I'm having the fun. Guys, if you're tuning in late, I have Mr. Loyd Auerbach. He's a widely recognized parapsychologist in the paranormal field. He's got a few books written. He's got a new book out called Near Death. And he's going to...
Yeah, I'll hold it up to fiction.
There you go.
This is fiction.
I'm excited because
I can't wait.
I can't wait to... I can't wait to read it. I'm excited to read it. We have a bunch of people in the chat. I just want to give a quick mention real quick to Gwen Clayton. We have a lot of people tonight in the chat, which I'm really grateful for, guys. A lot of people shared the show tonight. Want to give a big thank you to them for sharing the show. Big supporters out there. Philip Wyatt is in the chat. Mariah Kuno, hopefully.
Canal. She's a friend of mine and a really good medium. So.
Oh, nice. Welcome to the show. I hope you're having a good time listening. Gwen Clayton, Ronnie Anderson, Anthony Simonelli, Rania Cavetti, who I mentioned earlier. He had the science question earlier.
Right.
So guys, Loyd Auerbach, I've been waiting for this whole week. Parapsychology. Now, there's a lot of... when it comes to the paranormal field and those who think they're a parapsychologist, but they're not, they don't have any degree, they call themselves parapsychologists. What does it take to actually be a parapsychologist? What degree and, what education do you have to pursue?
Well, a degree doesn't make you necessarily that thing. So I can have a degree. I have a degree in anthropology, but I'm not an anthropologist.
Right.
You have to actually work in the field or practice in the field. And that means, parapsychology is the study of psychic phenomena. VSP, psychokinesis, survival of bodily death. So calling yourself a parapsychologist just because you do ghost hunting, you could call yourself perhaps a layperson parapsychologist or even an amateur. You know, there are a lot of amateur astronomers out there, and amateur astronomers actually make many discoveries about astronomy. But there was one big difference between an amateur astronomer and when people call themselves parapsychologists, who I've met and my colleagues have met and some of my students have met, and that is amateur astronomers know something about astronomy. Mm. Most of the people who have called themselves parapsychologists do not know the history of parapsychology. They couldn't tell you when it started. Mm. They couldn't tell you what it's about, what the research is. They couldn't name more than a couple of researchers. So to be calling yourself an amateur is fine, but you should know something about the field. That means you're studying things, and to study the phenomena and experiences means you need to know what has gone before and how people are studying them. If you're going to be a parapsychologist, at the very least, you should get involved with the Parapsychological Association. Right. So you are connecting to the community of parapsychologists and actively either educating or field work, but again, field work informed by the other work that's done, all of that. I will tell you that back in the 1970s, 60s and 70s, if you looked in the phone book, this thing that people forgot existed called the Yellow Pages, the physical Yellow Pages.
I don't think anybody uses that anymore. It's Google.
Yeah.
Everything's Google.
They're like this thick now. But there was a category for parapsychologists in almost every Yellow Pages.
Really?
And without fail, with the rarest of exception, they were all psychics who thought that it was cool to call themselves parapsychologists. So they just put themselves in there and started using that term, right and left. Right. We actually had it's actually illegal in all states to call yourself a psychologist if you don't fit certain requirements. Mm. That's actually in the code, the state codes of every state. Wow. And we actually had a conversation with somebody from the licensing board here in California a number of years ago, back in the 80s, actually, at one of our conventions, who was saying that, it's really borderline to call yourselves parapsychologists because the word psychologist is part of it. And all of us basically said, so is mainstream psychology going to accept parapsychology as a real thing? Because they don't. Right.
Yeah.
So they do. We don't have to worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Psychologists think we're nuts.
Yeah. There was one of my colleagues, Dean Radin, actually did a survey, I think 2005, of people in every field of science and subfields, and found that it was somewhere with 34 to 37% of psychologists accepted that ESP and other psychic things were possible. Not even existed. That was possible. That's a low number for psychologists. Wow. 72 or 73% of quantum physicists said it was possible.
Wow. Who would have thought that?
We would have thought that almost every. That was not a surprise to anybody. It literally was not a surprise to us at all.
Right.
Yeah.
That's funny. I have a question from Philip Wyatt. What is your most impressive, to you, piece of evidence that you have captured yourself?
Not a single piece of evidence. I can't say that one piece of evidence is fully impressive to me. But I've had a couple of cases, one in particular that I wrote up in the book Surviving Death by Leslie Kean, which is out there, and will be very soon a Netflix miniseries, a documentary series. It'll be on early in the year, early in 2021, we're told. Nice. So I had a case in which the amount of information that came from a young boy who was supposedly interacting with an apparition, with a ghost, who had also been seen by other family members on a fairly regular basis, although they hadn't talked to each other about it. The amount of confirmable information, and it was hard for me to confirm until I found this woman's only living relative, was overwhelmingly in favor of either this kid being some kind of super psychic, or there was a ghost there. Because of all the information we got, not just about her life, but about family interactions, and then also about information, how he told us what she said about being a ghost and how it all worked. There really wasn't any literature that this kid could have found, no internet. He couldn't have found anything at that point in time, because it was before my first book was written. he would have had to dig to find that information, that kind of model, which is one we've used for a long time in parapsychology. So that one case really shifted me from a point where I wasn't sure if there was survival of death to, hey, this evidence can't be supported by anything else except maybe that the kid might have found some series of journals that this woman left behind in the house because they bought the house as an estate sale. But they had no motivation to try to fool us. They didn't go on for any TV, anything. There was literally no motivation. And since they moved into the house, the mother of this kid had been looking for any records or data that showed anything that showed the origins of this porcelain doll collection that they had got. They had got the house in an estate sale with a lot of antique furniture and other things. She found nothing. She couldn't find anything.
Wow.
So it just was too far-fetched to even think that was possible. Plus, he wasn't that great a student, so memorizing all that stuff would have been tough.
Definitely. Really interesting questions in the chat. So I'm trying to keep up with everybody because there's a lot of people in there. All right, on to the next question that I have. As far as I'm sure you still do paranormal investigations, what is your most memorable investigation recently?
I haven't done too many recently. Well, I haven't done any in the last couple of months because
Right, because of COVID, yeah.
Because of COVID, we're not going to do anything.
Yeah,
I have to be very honest. The last probably 10 years or more, very few cases have come to me or come to us.
Wow.
And it's partly because since the TV show started up, as I'm sure everybody knows, every city has at least one ghost hunting group, and sometimes a lot more than that. And they do a lot of social media, and they do a lot more than I possibly have time for. And they make bigger promises.
Right.
You know, we have to be very honest about what we and ethical about how we present things. But I've seen such really weird claims and wild claims from ghost hunting groups over the years. So that's been very difficult. I have a case going on right now, which I really wish I could go to in person. It is a poltergeist case. It's all physical activity. I've even roped in a couple of my colleagues on it, happening where a family is having all sorts of physical activity. And this is a very honest family. I mean, it's very clearly something is going on there, and I'd love to get down there, but we have to wait till COVID's over, unfortunately.
I know. COVID has ruined everything for everybody. It really has. So a lot of...
It's meant that I don't have to travel for work right now, which is not a bad thing.
Oh, yeah. For those who get to work from home.
Yeah.
I'm a security guard at a high school, so...
that sucks.
Yeah. But it keeps things interesting. Keeps me on my toes, so let's put it that way. Yeah, but just real quick, guys, I just want to give a shout out to all, the great EMTs, the nurses, and the doctors, and 911 and PD, and all the men and women who serve our country out there right now during this whole pandemic situation. I just want to throw a reminder of how much I'm grateful and thankful for all your services, and I want Strange Oddities Podcast to know how much we appreciate you people and your hard work.
Absolutely.
I just want to throw that out there. I don't forget about you guys. I love all you guys, and God bless you guys for being out there. But and all of our supporters at Strange Oddities Podcast. Like I said, you never know who's going to be on the show. That's the motto of the show. And I have Mr. Loyd Auerbach, who I've been, I couldn't wait to have him on this week. I said I couldn't believe he actually accepted to be a guest on the show. So there's a lot to talk about. I mean, when it comes to mediums, they're like, I'm sure, like, from when you started out in the field, if you rewind back to when you first started and you go all the way to today, back then there wasn't there was a few people with abilities, that were very reputable, and you had your Sylvia Browns and your Edwards and
not reputable. Sylvia Brown.
I know. I'm making a point.
Yeah.
But then now you have there's so many people out there who claim they're psychic and they're mediums, and I just find it that I think it's really rare to find somebody with rare gifts, and what's your thoughts with that? Like how that's kind of grown in the field. It's like,
well, there were as many in proportion back in the late 1800s, early 1900s when spiritualism was at its heyday.
Yeah.
And in the 60s and 70s, there was an upswing of people claiming to be psychic. But what's happened is that I think, first of all, there have been some really good mediums setting a different standard for what we call evidential mediumship. And that's in our culture. You know, in the UK, there's been Arthur Findlay College has been around for a really long time, training people to be mediums. And when it comes right down to it, everybody has some form of psychic ability. The question is, what form is that? What can you learn to or practice to do better? And we can teach people to find the thing they're good at, but they may not be great at it. Right. They may be good at it, but they may not be great at it. Right. Just like people can learn some form of art, but they may never achieve true artistic ability or musical ability for that matter. Right. So it's very similar to that. I think we're in a place though, because we see so many folks on television, we see a lot more mimicry happening. Mm-hmm. And I know from the other organization I'm involved in is the Forever Family Foundation.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah. So this is a nonprofit, 501c3, all volunteer organization, makes no money whatsoever. Even the mediums we work with don't charge, we charge for the events as donations to the foundation to support it. The organization supports the work of certified mediums, and I'll explain that in a moment, in the family grieving process, and also supports researchers and education in the kind of research we do for life after death, for survival of death. So this organization was started by a couple who lost their daughter in a car crash, teenage daughter. And through a friend who was seeing a medium, they got a message from the daughter. It didn't come directly to them. And it took Bob Ginsberg, who was the man in this couple, quite a while to actually come to terms with this medium actually getting information from their daughter. He was a total skeptic, didn't believe in this at all. And he came to believe, because of who the medium was, because of the information, the evidence that was being presented to them, they felt really came from Bailey. So they found other couples, other families that had lost kids as well. Mm-hmm. And who through this medium and a couple of other mediums who had actually gained serious grief relief from that process. And they, working with the scientific advisory board, they set up a testing protocol to look for people or test people to see if they were evidential. In other words, could they produce real evidence, not generalizations, not, the kind of cold reading crap that you hear from a lot of folks.
Right.
So we have on the website, which is foreverfamilyfoundation.org, a list of our certified mediums if people are looking for somebody.
Nice.
They're all cool people. They're really cool people. And so with that said,
I just want to say I really respect that.
Thank you. With that said, these mediums also participate in research. Some of them went through a long process of testing for the Windbridge Research Center, and our research mediums also. So when we talk about all the number of people that are out there, I've been told that the foundation gets calls from people every so often saying, I'm a medium, I want to be tested. And they would ask, so why are you a medium? Why do you think you're a medium? And the person would say, I saw my Uncle Harry. He died. I saw him. We had a conversation. I must be a medium. That doesn't make you a medium. No. That means you may have had a mediumistic experience, a spirit communication experience, but a medium is someone who has control over it, who can actually reach people.
Yeah.
So we've had to engage people in that. In fact, I'm teaching a workshop with a medium friend of mine up in Seattle. We're doing a virtual workshop in January for people who think that they're mediums, just to explain, to try to help them to figure out if they really are or are not, and how to be better if they are, and what to do if they're not, all of that. So there are a lot of people who think they're mediums out there now. There are a lot of people who have fooled themselves into being calling themselves sensitives because they do pick up things, but maybe through their normal senses, not through ESP. There are people who seem to have real abilities, but they don't know how to frame them.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of experiences, so there are ways to learn, and there are a lot of phonies. That's the other side. The downside is,
unfortunately,
there's a ton of phonies out there.
Yeah.
And it's not hard to fake it.
Right. So, what would you recommend people that feel they do have abilities or a gift? what would be the guidelines for them as far as from your perspective as a parapsychologist or with your background? Would you recommend them get certified by somebody who's very knowledgeable, who's had a lot of experience in the field? Do you think they should be tested in a laboratory environment, like as far as to see if they really do have the abilities in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we don't have the resources in our field to test everybody.
Right.
We don't have enough people. We don't have the
Sure.
funding for it. We'd actually
Right.
have to charge people to test them if
Hmm.
we even could do that, just because we just don't have the personnel to do it.
Right.
What I suggest is people, if they think that they're mediums, that they seek out good teachers. I'm always willing to make recommendations, as are the mediums who are in the Forever Family Foundation.
Right.
There are sources of information. There are a few good books that teach you how to be more psychic. There are also a lot of crappy books out there. There are some people who offer to teach people to be mediums and certify them and make them medium teachers. I'm thinking of one in particular that charges over $7,000 for a program,
Yikes.
which to me is a scam.
Yeah.
When you're charging that much.
Anything with multiple zeros. Yeah.
It's okay if you're teaching some. That's like if I went to art school, guaranteeing that I'm going to be an artist. You're going to be a painter. You're going to be able to paint really well. It's $10,000. It's like, I know my artistic ability. I am
Right.
not going to be able to do that.
Right.
Trying to teach me to draw. I want to draw comic books.
Yeah.
You want me to pay 10 grand to teach me how to draw comic books? That is never going to happen.
Right.
I have
Right.
tried.
Right.
People have tried to teach me. It's just I'm not teachable in that area. I don't
Right.
have the aptitude. So it's the same with the remote viewing courses. There are courses in remote viewing that from people who actually were connected with Stargate for a short time, or possibly for a longer time, but didn't do very well necessarily.
Mm.
And they're teaching in a form of remote viewing training that was actually a washout from the program. The CIA asked them to come up with a training program, which became CRV, or coordinate or controlled remote viewing, which works for very left-brain people sometimes, but it didn't work for most people. I always recommend people just read Joe McMoneagle's book, Remote Viewing Secrets, or Paul Smith's books about this, because those are two people who actually could do it and don't have extensive things. But you don't have to spend $5,000 for a course when you can just sit down and learn how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I like the ones that showed up on the news about getting arrested for trying to scam an elderly lady for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And to me, that's karma. You shouldn't be doing that.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a horrible thing. A few years ago, I talked to a woman who was scammed out of $33,000 in San Francisco by a psychic who was still in San Francisco, and she was trying to get the money back. And I pushed her to talk into the district attorney's office. And they didn't want to pursue it right off the bat because, with con artists, it's really hard because you gave them the money willingly.
Yeah.
But I gave her enough that I think they did go after that woman after all. I know that she left town. So I don't know if they just scared her off or what happened. But that's a problem. There were scams that have been produced by a number of well-known psychics. So we got complaints about Sylvia Brown at JFK University back when I was in the 80s for some things.
Right. Yeah, Sylvia Brown, Edwards. I mean, there's a whole slew of them out
there. John
there.
Edwards is a different story. John Edwards has proven himself in the laboratory.
Has he? Okay. I wasn't sure if he has or not.
I got to tell you that doesn't mean that when he's performing in front of a large audience that he's always getting stuff from spirit.
Right.
Teresa Caputo, the Long Island medium, who I will tell you, if you watch that show and wonder if she's really like that, yes, she is. She was one of the first persons to be certified by the Forever Family Foundation.
Oh wow! I did not know that.
I saw her in action with an audience of about 100 people in New York before her show really took off. Her show was on, but it hadn't taken off yet. And I got to tell you, I was blown away at how good she was. I haven't seen the videos I've seen of her in more recent years, where after she's gotten famous and started doing things for thousands of people. I haven't seen that quality. So, it's whether it's gone to her head or just simply it's certainly easier to be general in a lot, especially with a huge audience.
Right.
Because then you leave people happier than if you can only get one person out of the audience. So,
Right, right. Yeah, group settings, I can't imagine being really tough to, because if you have a bunch of spirits in the room going, hey, I want to communicate, and you have like 200 people in the room, it's like, what do
Yeah.
you do?
I've worked with a medium by the name of Sandra O'Hara, who is from Ireland and also an amazing evidential medium. And she and I she was doing groups of no more than 25 for that very reason, because she didn't want to have to be sitting there all day. And we finally worked it out because she wanted to do larger group, and bigger groups wanted her. And we actually ended up doing something for about 125 people. But part of it was telling people that, look, I can't possibly get to everybody.
Right.
So you need to put the word out to your relatives that they have to push themselves to the front of the line, because we have an hour and a half, and I get too tired after that time, so I'm cutting it then.
Wow. But I really admire the psychics and mediums that work with detectives that try to find missing people, help missing children, or solve a murder or a crime, or like what you mentioned before, that help grieving families, and that those to me are people I could really kind of respect, and with the way they use their abilities, not so much flaunt it like so they can make money. I get it, but I'm not sure if I'm really into that whole like money making thing, off of their abilities. That me personally, I don't know. I'm just like,
Well,
to each their own, but
that's one thing that is a problem, I think, with psychics, and it's often a sign of somebody not knowing their own abilities. I know I heard Sylvia Brown talking about never, that you can't use it to make money. Whenever anybody asked her, why don't you just pick the horse races or the lottery, and she said, you can't use it to make money. In the meantime, she was charging like $800 for a reading. And if that's not making money with her abilities, I don't know what is.
Right.
It's not, it depends on how you look at the ability. And it is a human ability. ESP is a human ability, like a creative talent. So saying that a psychic shouldn't ask for money for their time or their expertise is, if they really are that, is like saying you shouldn't be paying professional musicians for doing, something when in fact there's a guy down the street who sounds just as good as you and does it for nothing.
Right.
So, we have to pay people for their time. People have to make a living. So if you want that psychic to actually do stuff, they have to make a living. And that's important.
Get it.
Yeah. No, the thing is that psychics who work with police, usually they don't get paid.
Right.
They often do it for nothing, but there's also a lot of people claiming to have solved crimes that didn't. And actually, even the best. My late colleague, Annette Martin, who was a phenomenal psychic and medium, we wrote a book together called The Ghost Detective's Guide to San Francisco. And Annette, she was verifiably a psychic who worked with police. In fact, she testified in a court case in our county here. And she was working with a homicide detective from Marin County Sheriff's. She worked with a number of others. She had letters from judges. And she basically, the important factor about her was that she did not solve crimes. She provided information that allowed the police to solve the crime.
Right.
Because that's the important distinction, is psychics don't solve crimes.
Right. No, exactly.
Psychics don't gather the evidence that is necessary to convict the person, to arrest that person. Right. Psychics can present a piece of the puzzle, and the psychics who are aware of that and can work in conjunction with police from that perspective are the ones who are consulted regularly.
Right. So I want to try to catch up with everybody's questions here, because there was a few that I missed. I don't want to miss everybody's questions. Trying to get to them as best I can here, guys. There's a lot of people in the chat. Going back to poltergeist real quick. If you make the agent of poltergeist activity aware of their ability, can they channel that energy on command? It wouldn't be RSPK.
Right. So RSPK stands for recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. If you're in control, it's not spontaneous anymore. We have had occasional poltergeist agents who have been trained to actually control their abilities. We had a woman who was a bartender in the Bay Area back in the 80s who actually worked with us at JFK University. And we taught her, we worked with her to learn how to use her abilities. And then she got bored, especially after her manager yelled at her at the bar for doing some PK. So,
That's funny.
but so you can teach. It still burns out after a while because people either lose interest or it gets too weird for people because their friends all think they're weird. So there's this cultural element, but yes, you can teach people to do that for sure.
Yeah. Well, we have to be weird to be involved in the paranormal.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think most people they're weird if they're not. So
Yeah.
I did happen to catch that one of my co-authors, Arnold Rudnick, the co-author that posted,
Yeah.
should ghosts wear masks in COVID?
Yeah, I didn't want to miss that one. I saw him in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so the answer to that is only if they're made out of ectoplasm.
Yeah, but then ectoplasm is full of chemicals, so you're gonna be breathing in ectoplasm.
No, it shouldn't be full of any chemicals, theoretically.
Theoretically.
Besides, you're dead, so what do you care?
Yeah, that's right. No pun intended. All right. We have another good question. Do you feel that popularity through TV and media and the tons of investigating teams may be discouraging the continuation of work by those who were in the field before that fad hit? I believe that may be why the brilliant parapsychologist like Peter Jordan is no longer active in the field.
I know Pete. I knew Pete. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but that may be why Pete's not involved. I know that he was also interested in UFOs, and that kind of took over his interest. He and I for a time, were represented by the same speaker agency, and so that he was going in that direction. I'm not sure exactly if that was it. And at the time that he shifted away from it and stopped doing ghost investigations, I don't think there were that many ghost hunting groups at that time. But certainly, the thing that is difficult for us today, we already alluded to it earlier, and that is we don't get as many calls anymore because they're going to the low-hanging fruit in the areas. And when I do get calls, half of them at least are people who were discouraged or even really upset by what the ghost hunting group did, such as coming in and either kicking them out or just gathering evidence overnight, showing them the evidence, and then leaving. In general, people call for help. They don't call just out of curiosity most of the time.
Right.
So it has hurt. That's one thing that has hurt us who like to do field investigations, who want to do those investigations. The second piece of it, though, is the TV shows focusing on evil, demonic, malevolent, getting people that way. And so many groups who do that, who actually come in with that attitude or that idea or that label, has caused people to be freaked out more than they ever have been since the movie The Exorcist came out. That caused in the 70s, there was my colleagues, and this people I knew in the field, because I was still in high school at that time in college, but I knew that the people in the field were upset because people believed that was real. And then Amityville was real. So people were freaking out if they had an experience. So you spent a lot of time basically demystifying and getting people calmed down. And that happened again after the movie Poltergeist came out with me. It did not happen after Ghostbusters. The exact opposite happened after Ghostbusters,
right?
Which was great. That was great. But yeah, it's a real problem. And I actually get calls from shows that over the years that have been around, and they want, can you recommend cases to us? It's like, yeah, no. You start out your show by saying there is evil here. I'm not going to recommend a case to you.
Yeah, right.
I don't have any evil cases.
Yeah. It's funny because I used to get a lot of calls from private homes where, because they were watching the shows on TV, they didn't think their homes were haunted until they started watching the show. And now they think they have something in their house when they don't really, because, they were freaked out by what they saw on TV.
Yeah, and I actually saw something fly back here about whether or not there's more activity because of COVID. I think that if people were living in a house that had an apparition, they might notice it more frequently because they're home more. If they live in a house that had a residual haunting, they're definitely going to notice that more. But also people are going to notice things about their house they never noticed before, about creaks and sounds. And if they watch those shows, they might think that those things are ghosts, and they're not.
Right. What's your most influences as far as your field work and your laboratory work? Like, what have been your most influences as far as public figures, or people?
So certainly, when I was doing especially in grad school doing laboratory work and such, really there are a number of folks in the field who have done amazing work over the years. And even since then, since I've been in the field, not doing lab work too much at all, but paying attention. The late Robert Morris did an enormous amount of work on human-machine interactions, how we unconsciously affect electronics and other devices, either for good or for bad. We make them fail, we make them possibly even work better. That work was absolutely important to me. The Gonsfeld work, which involves a light sensory deprivation that was done at the Psychophysical Research Laboratory by Chuck Honorton and Ephraim Schechter and other people. This was in Princeton, New Jersey. That's important work, really important work that has been replicated. That method's been replicated over and over again over time. The remote viewing work that started with Targan Puthoff, calling it that, actually, although they didn't continue with it for very long, but not just the government work, because that was secret, but the people doing the work for the government were also doing research that they were publishing. Mm-hmm. And people in the field, such as Stephen Schwartz and Keith Harari, were doing remote viewing experiments and even applying it to archaeology and predicting futures in the silver market and things like that. So real applied applications aside. From an investigation standpoint, I got to say I've got some really good mentors. John Palmer was who's still around. He was an amazing researcher and ran the parapsychology program when I was in graduate school. Scott Rogo, if you really want to read books by an amazing investigator, his books some of them are coming back in print now. He wrote books on all sorts of topics in parapsychology, ROGO, Scott Rogo. And he wrote books on his investigations. Investigations were really enlightening. And he was one of our faculty at JFK. And then there are a number of other people. I worked with Carlos Osis and Alex Tanis at the American Society for Psychical Research for the time that I was there in the early 80s out of grad school. And Osis was a really cool investigator. Old Latvian guy who talked with a thick accent and looked like Peter Cushing from the Dracula movies. And Alex Tanis was a psychic who was consulted every other week by FBI, NYPD, Boston PD. I mean, they would come to the AS bar to consult with him whenever he was in town. So he was an unsung hero in law enforcement, by the way.
Nice.
He never made a big deal about it. But he was also doing out-of-body research, and he and Osis gave me the psychic and the parapsychologist side of doing investigations. And so they kind of shaped me more than anything else for my investigations, I think.
Right.
And then I had people like Martin Caden and a couple of skeptics, and being in the magic world as well has helped me enormously, too.
Yeah. Did you happen to appreciate any of the work of Houdini or?
Houdini, when I got into magic, and I'd already read books about Houdini for years. Right. When I got into magic, and Houdini was his best trick was making the public aware of him. Yeah. He was a master. If he was around today, he would be the king of all media. Forget Larry King. He would be the king of all media. He would be the king of social media. He would be appearing all over the world at the same time because he would have hired a bunch of Houdini people to pretend to be him. He was an amazing escape artist and an amazing magician. And but he wasn't an influence for me. I learned magic from a couple local magicians and started performing, and it was actually with some other people learning performance and actually performing in front of an audience is what taught me more. And then my late colleague Marcello Truzzi, who was a skeptic, but a middle-of-the-road skeptic. He was a sociologist he actually wrote a book on psychic detectives, supporting the work of psychic detectives, and he didn't even believe in psychic ability. He just thought that they had something else that made them work. Nice. So Marcello got me into the psychic entertainment world, into mentalism, and he was definitely a really good person to bounce things off of for a long time. So since the early 90s, I've been Professor Paranormal, a psychic entertainer, doing mind reading and other fun things.
Right. Nice. Awesome. We're getting down to the bottom of the show. One other question in the chat. This is a really interesting question. Do you do tests for infrasound at locations you're investigating? They can't afford an infrasound detector. Sad. Yeah. Again, we have no money.
No, I know. I understand that. I don't have a lot of money for equipment either. So here's the deal. Infrasound can cause certain effects. They can make people feel anxious. Infrasound can also vibrate the eyeball at a certain frequency, so that you see things shadows out of the corner of your eyes. So the anxiety piece is going to be there in a lot of cases. That might be from infrasound, it might not be. The shadows out of the corner of their eye, that's likely from infrasound. An interesting way to test for infrasound is you have to find a surface that itself is not vibrating when you're walking around, but maybe put it on the floor. Get a glass of water, put it on the floor, seeing if anything's vibrating. Jello can vibrate. There are also infrasound. I have an infrasound detector on my Android phone, which actually is not perfect, certainly, but at least gives me an idea that there's some low frequency sound there.
Very cool. There's some ideas for you.
Yeah,
there's always room for Jello.
Yeah.
All right. I want to show people some of your books. I'm going to share the screen.
Okay.
Hopefully I don't lose you here. Share the screen. I've been getting better at this. Share screen. Here we go. Guys, this is where you can get some of his books. I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. Hope you guys can see it. Near Death is a new book he just put out, and I can't wait to read it again. ESP, Hauntings and Poltergeists, a Parapsychologist Handbook. That's available. Psychic Dreaming, Dream Working, Reincarnation, Out-of-Body Experiences, and Clairvoyance. Another book.
The ghost hunting book, that's not actually the cover, and for some reason my publisher just put that up. I have no idea why.
Wow.
She did that for ghost hunting.
Right. Ghost Hunting, How to Investigate the Paranormal. And again, one of your favorite pieces of work, Mind Over Matter, a comprehensive guide to discovering your psychic powers. And I hope everybody can see the screen. So
and so that's a lot of these books are available in Kindle format. One of my older books, Reincarnation Channeling Possession, is available in Kindle and Nook format, ebook format only. And my Paranormal Case book is out of print, but I'm working on it right now, and I should have it back up on Amazon probably I'm hoping by Halloween, but if not, certainly in early November.
Right.
Both in Kindle and paperback form. That's literally a book of my cases.
Nice. Do you have a website that you can share information for everybody to access and find any kind of bio or background where they can read about you?
The best thing to do, honestly, my website's been down for a while. I going back and forth with someone on recreating it at this point, so it's not there right now. But you can find me on Facebook. Just put in you see the spelling of my name on the screen there. It's only one L. I have an author page on Facebook. I'll be a lot more active on it since we have Near Death out at this point. You can also connect with me on Twitter, either at Loyd Auerbach or at Prof Paranormal. And I do have a couple of YouTube channels. If you look up youtube.com/Loyd Auerbach, you'll come to a lot of my TV appearances. And if you put in youtube.com/Prof Paranormal, you'll see some lectures that I put up of mine from a few years ago, including one on Mind Over Matter. That's there.
Right. And also, the Parapsychology Association will have some information about Mr. Loyd Auerbach.
That's right. The Parapsychological Association does.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of information about Loyd there. So I'm going to share the screen for that real quick. Here we go.
And that's parapsych.org.
Yes.
Yeah, you can also go to parapsychology.org. You won't get to me, but that's the Parapsychology Foundation.
Yep.
And then I would go to the Rhine Research Center. It's just Rhine, RHINE.org.
Yep.
We have a ton of, if you become a member, you get access to a huge media library and you get discounts on things. And we also have some free lectures, free video up there in the media library.
And I'm going to show them their website as well.
Good.
As soon as I get this up here real quick. I have the right one, rhineonline.org. Is that the...
That'll work, yeah. Rhine.org takes you to rhineonline.org.
Okay. So.
And we also do have a website for our Near Death series. It's rainyandday.com.
Nice. And here you go, guys. This is the...
Here's the Rhine.
Yep, that's the Rhine. I'm getting better at this.
Cool.
Nice. I can flip back and forth without losing anybody. That's the most important thing. All right. So Well, I had a lot of fun. I hope you did, Lloyd. I hope I was a great host for you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, it was a great conversation. I would love to have you back in the future. We could talk about a bunch of other stuff that you
sure.
have going on, and I always like to keep in touch with all my guests. Um, but it's been real fun. I hope our listeners and viewers had a great time. There were really some interesting questions in the chat. That was great questions by them. I don't know. Any last words to our listeners and viewers, or anybody in the paranormal field? Any last words from the great Mr. Loyd Auerbach?
The one thing I'll tell you is just kind of words of wisdom is the thing to do always is to look into whether the source you're getting information from is real. Is it connected to the field of parapsychology? Is that person connected, or at least are we aware of that person? I have people contacting the Rhine Center, contacting me to verify that someone is a parapsychologist or involved in some way. But ask questions. See if what they're saying actually fits what people in our field actually say, and know that the field goes back to the late 1800s. The Society for Psychical Research was started in 1882, and it's still going strong, even online. So there's a vast history and there's a ton of stuff that's available for free on the Internet Archive. But I will pass along the words of my late friend Martin Caden, who, when asked about why science is ignoring this and whether they shouldn't ignore it at all, his response was, "It shouldn't be happening, but it is."
Nice. That's a great quote. But I had a lot of fun, Lloyd. If you want to just stay on with me as I just close our credits out,
Sure.
I'll say our goodbyes after our credits are over, and But thank you again for being a guest on the Strange Oddities podcast, guys. I'll be sharing a link. You can always replay the episode if you missed it live. Not a problem. You can always replay it on our YouTube channel and Facebook. We're multicasting, simulcasting on a whole bunch of different places. Guys, you can catch it on Spotify, the KGRA radio network. You guys can catch it on Podbean, iTunes. I don't know. We're all over the place now, so I'm happy about that. All right. So, Lloyd, we're going to say our goodbyes after our credits, and I hope everybody enjoyed our guest tonight. Get his new book. I'm just going to, share this again, guys. Near Death. All right. It's going to be a good read. All right. So, I'm going to play our video here. And, guys, next week, I have Mr. Bishop James Long, the exorcist. He's an exorcist. Been on TV, big TV personality. He helps a lot of families in need. He's a very, very good exorcist. Very knowledgeable about demonology. And in that field, going to have him on next week, next Thursday. We're going to start at, I believe, 7:30 special time for Mr. Bishop James Long is going to be on for October 22nd at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. All right. So that's a special time for next week, guys. Again, thanks for KGRA Radio Network for rebroadcasting our show on their radio station. Guys, thank you for tuning in and supporting the podcast. For all those who shared the podcast tonight, thank you again for that. I really appreciate it. Guys, if you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can get all the happenings and latest news from there. All right, so guys, be well, be safe, have a great night. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Strange Oddities podcast. You can listen to the rebroadcast on the KGRA radio. Check out kgraradio.com for the rebroadcast at 2 a.m. Eastern Time, 11 p.m. Pacific Time. You can catch the Strange Oddities podcast live every week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Please follow our YouTube channel for our live weekly show at 8 p.m. If you like the show, please give us feedback. Email us at strangeodditiespodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit our website, strangeodditiespodcast.wordpress.com. Tune in every week, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the YouTube channel. You can also look us up on Facebook. We have a Facebook page where all the news and information about upcoming guests and anything Strange Oddities Podcast is doing, go to our Facebook page, give us a like, and give us a shout. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and again, thanks again for the KGRA for rebroadcasting the Strange Oddities Podcast.